Today we are going to be talking about Maya Bifrost. So what is Maya Bifrost? Basically, it's an incredibly powerful fluid simulator that you get in Maya. Much like Maya Fluids, it is created through a flip solver, which basically stands for Fluid Impact Solver, that simulates liquid effects. So basically you can create this solver and generate liquid from emitters that you create from, say, simple polygons, and they can interact with colliders. For example, that would be like a rigid body or a static object in Houdini. And this can create splashes, droplets. It can interact with whatever you want it to interact with and essentially create a pretty realistic overall simulation and special effect. So these are some examples of Maya Bifrost. It can get very, very specific, and it also can look very, very realistic given enough time with the right settings. But today we're just going to be learning the basic settings and understanding the pipeline of Bifrost. So there are a few objects, nodes, and attributes that are really important to Bifrost when learning it. The first one would be the Bifrost shape node. Basically allows you to mess with the render quality. If you want to render with a quality of 1, that's where you would change it. It's default at 0.5. Also, you can mess with the particle display type. For example, that would be like, by default is a point, but you can change that to spheres coming out of the emitter. It's all personal preference. The second node would be the Bifrost liquid container node. That basically is the liquid solver attributes, which give you the caching options, the emission options, collision, acceleration, all of those things. Basically, you would have to mess around with in this node. The collision option to change the collision between the collider and the emitter, how it splashes, basically like changing the droplets if you wanted to. Also the acceleration. If you're trying to speed up or slow down your water flow, that's where you would do that. And the last important node is the Bifrost liquid material node. Basically, that is where you change the color of your particles or your water. For example, with the diffuse, the reflection, and the refraction, all have options to remap, which come with a ramp, which you can change at will, depending on what colors you want, how much refraction versus reflection, what you're trying to achieve with your water. Also in this node, you get the mental ray settings. Basically, that will give you global illumination options, ambient occlusion, all those things that you would want in your final render once you're all said and done with your simulation. Eventually, there are two types of cache when working with Bifrost. The first one is the scratch cache. Basically, that's a temporary cache used to speed up playback and allow for scrubbing. Essentially, it's just used to preview your simulation before actually caching it to prepare for a render. So if you are emitting a fluid from a simple sphere, if you want to see that fluid come out of that sphere, that's how you would do that with a scratch cache. You would be able to scrub through. Essentially, that's how that works. And the other cache is the user cache. And that's basically meant to store the finished cache after you've finished adjusting your settings. It makes the simulation read from the disk as opposed to just the memory with the scratch cache. There are a lot of settings with the user cache to essentially get the correct cache, but we will go over that in the demonstration. So those are the two types of cache. So acceleration and kill planes. These are very important when it comes to simulating and the effect you're trying to achieve. I found that in messing around with all the settings that these two were fairly up there in things you need to know right off the bat. So the accelerators are basically, you would create another polygon underneath your emitter, and that would be your accelerator. And you would go ahead and select the polygon you want to be your accelerator, as well as the emitter or the flip object. And you go to Bifrost add accelerator, and this will give you this will turn your polygon that you wanted to be the accelerator, and it will play off of the emitter. You're able to change this in the Bifrost liquid container node under the tab acceleration. Essentially, positive numbers slow down the simulation and the water flow, and negative numbers will speed up the water flow. This is very, very essential when trying to create like a fountain or a slower water pour from maybe a cup or etc. And then the next one is kill planes. Basically, for kill planes, you just select the flip object or the emitter. You go to the Bifrost menu and you select kill plane under add. Basically, a plane like, it's not geometry, but it is a plane, shows up in the origin automatically, and you are able to move, scale, rotate this plane as you will. It's infinite, and it basically eliminates particles that cross from one side to another in a Bifrost simulation. So if you are simulating something and there are drops and splashes that exit the camera's view and there is no reason for them to be simulated anymore, a kill plane could kill those when they go off camera and take up less simulation time and save you in the long run, which happens a lot with simulations. If it's just hitting a collider, it will fall off and go into space unless you stop it. Okay. So creating a simulation. So this is where we will do a few demonstrations. So here I have 3 examples, simple examples of the 3 things I just talked about. So acceleration, just a regular sim, and a kill plane, which would be right there. We'll play the regular simulation first. The green right here that you see, that would be just showing the scratch cache. The way you know it's scratched cache, that's a tongue twister, is if the entire line is green, then you're able to scrub through. So we'll see that right now. So as it loads, kind of as Houdini does when it has that blue line in its timeline, as you can see, the rest of them are moving as well. So we can just zoom in and get a decent view, and then hit play again. It's scratch caching. Basically, this changes every single time you change a little thing in, if you move the emitter, if you change anything in the attribute editor, this will have to re-scratch cache. But as you can see, this plane on the bottom is a collider, and it is colliding with it. So I'll show you how to do that in just a second. It's creating what would be a splash. In the blue color, you see it's basically pulling straight from Mental Ray. This is the initial shader. So if you stop it right here and you scrub, well, if it stops in 1 second, there we go. You have the ability to scrub through your sim using the scratch cache. So if I'm like, that doesn't look good right there for whatever reason, or I don't like that splash, I'm able to change that. So that would be just a regular flip solver with a polygon sphere, and we just made that into a, if we go here, Bifrost, you guys can't see that, but Bifrost create liquid. But we will go through that in 1 second. And then this would be the example of an accelerator. I have the number, so this would be the accelerator. And if we go to the attribute editor and we go to, if we actually click that, we go to the Bifrost liquid container. The acceleration is right here, and it says voxel scale. I have it at 2. Its default is 1. But we'll put it at 2 to show you that with positive numbers, the sim or the water that comes out of the emitter is actually slower. This will act as the accelerator, so it'll fall around it, as you can see, scratch caching as well. Essentially, it slows it down. If I stop this and I make the acceleration voxel scale something like -5, and I go back and I hit play, it will move significantly faster once it starts to gain momentum and almost pass through this emitter. Eventually colliding. So that would be the accelerator, and then this would be our kill plane. So this, not that, this right here is our kill plane, and you can move that, scale that however you'd like. Make that a little bigger. And this is just a simple emitter. You don't have to change Nothing in the emitter changes when you create a kill plane in Bifrost. Add kill plane, it just creates a kill plane. As you can see, when the water falls from the emitter, it will start deleting particles as it hits this kill plane. Basically infinitely, so nothing will render past that, essentially. Okay, so those are our 3 examples that we had talked about. So now let's create something of our own. So actually, if we can select all this and Control H, and then we will restart. So basically, when you are creating a Bifrost simulation, you're going to want to start by creating something you want to emit the fluid from. So in this case, I'm just going to create a sphere from the Polygons tab, and I'll bring that up. Then I'm going to want to go, unfortunately it's not in the recording, but Bifrost right next to the help, create liquid. So first you want to select that Bifrost, create liquid. It creates the container around the solver, and so that's how we know. Something that's very, very important is under shapes in the channel box that the meshing enable is on. This allows you to see the actual geometry. It subdivides basically some geometry so that you can see what is actually coming out. So that is basically all you do. You just hit play, and you can see that the default shader is blue. It's coming out, it's playing from mental ray, and it is falling infinitely, essentially. So if we want this to collide with something, we will create a collider. So if you grab a plane from the Polygons tab and you scale that plane up, essentially the order of what I'm about to do does not matter, but the way I do it is I select the plane, which will be the collider, and the emitter, and I go to Bifrost, add collider. Now this plane will be a collider for the Bifrost simulation. Now as that goes down, if I select the container, actually you can see the green line while it's loading the scratch cache. And then it just splashes and it collides with the object, which is basically and essentially the basic pipeline for Maya Biforst when you're not getting too technical with it. As you can see, this splash is going off the collider. For example, if my camera was more zoomed in, I could just put a kill plane right here in Bifrost, add kill plane. So if we pause that, so, oh, no, Maya is not pausing. Oh no, okay, there we go. So we're able to scrub through that. To create an accelerator, like we talked about before, we'll just choose another polygon from the Polygons tab. We'll pull that up, so this will be our accelerator. Go to, select this. So you have essentially, mine's being a bit slow, select the accelerator, or what is going to be the accelerator, and the emitter, and you select add accelerator under Bifrost. Then we will select the node and make sure meshing enable is on. That way when you go to your attribute editor you have these tabs. You want to go to the Bifrost liquid shape like we did before, and we will make this voxel scale -3 for acceleration. And we'll go back and hit play, and that cube will now act as, oh well, it's actually not working, so let's go back, add accelerator. It seems like we're having an issue, but essentially that is how you do that. And then just to make a kill plane, we do Bifrost, add kill plane. Oh, so now select the emitter first, add kill plane. And we just pull that up. And if we didn't want any particles coming anywhere past this point, which is essentially the beginning, we would just hit play and it would go no further. So, infinitely deleting particles. which can be handy, but in this case, not so handy. I don't know why you'd want to delete all your particles, but for the sake of demonstration. So yeah, that is how, essentially, you create a simulation. This is very, very basic. Obviously, with the more geometry you add, that changes. If we hit play, let the sim run for a bit, pause it, select the container, and then go to our attribute editor. Mine is being a bit slow. And go to our Bifrost liquid material. As we talked about before, the three most important ones are the Bifrost shape, Bifrost liquid container, and Bifrost liquid material. You can see here that we have the diffuse map, a foam remap, a reflection remap, refraction. But essentially, if you didn't like this default shader color, you could just go ahead and double click this and go, I want orange water for whatever reason, or purple, or green, and that would basically be your diffuse. And you have a ramp, you can change that, you can add to it, and there's actually a sample up here. It's not too specific. You can change the interpolation, and you can move. This will change the type of water, the way the water is coming out. Same with reflection. You can reflect highlights only, but for this case, default is using for now reflections. Reflection remap essentially is the same thing. If you want your reflections to be what the color of a sunset is, if for some reason you're creating the ocean, you could just make that orange, but we have to actually turn that on first to do that. So yeah, that would be how you would do that, and so forth. So that is basically how to do the simulation. As you can see, I have a bunch here, but you can select your simulation through the outliner. So here's the mesh, here's the plane that it's colliding with, here's the actual container, and the liquid that is going to soon come out. So you can see it's constrained. So yeah, if we just can get back to this. So yeah, we spoke about this. So working with colliders, we talked about you select the Bifrost, you select Bifrost and add collider, but don't forget that you have to select what you want to collide, then the emitter, and then add collider. And the same goes for remove collider. If you want to remove a collider, I could just go ahead and select that plane we created and go to Bifrost under remove and just choose collider. And so rendering is essentially the last thing. For a user cache, which I might as well go in here and show it, you want to reduce unnecessary computations. So essentially, if you go to Bifrost, Bifrost options, if you, well, normally this is checked, but if you uncheck it, you have the ability to, this takes away background processing also, and then you have the ability to uncheck enable scratch caching, which is important because when you are using when you're going to the user cache, you do not want scratch caching on. Also, you want to make sure that this is off in the actual, if I can find it, Bifrost liquid container node, and that just gets rid of the cache. As you can see, the green line disappeared. If you want the scratch cache on, which we want like we wanted, then you would turn it back on. But for this case, you would want to choose enable disk. You would want the cache name and the directory to be put in here. So yeah, you want that enable background processing unchecked. So then you would just select the Bifrost object. And then you would go to Bifrost, compute and cache to disk. Hit the option box. Essentially, this is the directory. So, for example, it has it in Documents Maya Projects Default Cache, and then Untitled. So whatever you would go to name that. And when you have all of this done, oh no, don't forget to put your start and end frame. So start frame 1, end frame, in this case I have it to 72, so 72, just so that you're caching the exact amount of frames you want. And then just create and apply, and that's how that works. And then essentially you just, if you want to, now that you've cached all your settings, render. If you go to the liquid container node, down here, if we can find, if you close this and this, mental ray, I don't see it, I might be in the wrong node. I think I am, I totally am. Okay. So in the Bifrost liquid material node, you will find the mental ray node. Mental ray, I just closed it, but if I open it again, basically the frame buffer, light linking, advanced reflection, advanced refraction. If you want to add a bump, ambient occlusion, indirect illumination options, all of that you can do in the Bifrost liquid material node. And then you would just go ahead and fix all your render settings and then run a render, or a batch render to be very specific. So yeah, that is a very, very basic overview of Maya Biforst. To take it any further would take a lot of time, but just to show you the very basics, yeah, that would be it. So thanks so much for listening.